Just because somebody may ask, there's what she looks like. All wrapped up in there. You see my crimp, or my whatever crimper ends, alligator clip ends are in there. My cable's in there. That's what's going to sit on my bike. You can see how thin that is, how small that is. Won't leave the bike again because too many times I've needed this. You can create or carry a jumper pack if you want. I have 2 jumper packs. I've got the traditional lithium battery jumper pack. I also have one that is a super capacitor version that charges up off of a dead battery and then will boost that dead battery. It's a strange concept, but it works. But I won't have to carry that anymore because now I have this peace of mind. I just can't count how many times I've been on a ride and I've asked, hey, you got jumper cables? No. Even cars, they don't have jumper cables. So it surprises me. So now I'm prepared. I can hit the road. I won't have as much worry. Pretty certain I got the electrical problem whipped. But hey, you know what? I've had so many issues. It's time I did something and made a peace of mind for myself. So thanks for watching. Have a great night, great day. Happy riding. No matter what you ride, the only thing that matters is you got the wind in the face and your knees to the sun. All right, so I wanted to show you how I'm doing the ends here. On the clamp side of the cable, you have to go through and you have to shave this line down a little bit to be able to get all your heat shrink on. You may or may not with this version. Now, the first piece of tube, you notice I put 2 pieces of tube on here. The first tube is a 10 millimeter. And what I'm going to do is heat shrink that up right up to this butt splice here. And then this bigger piece, which is a 1/2 inch on the outside, it will cover the entire butt connector once I'm done with it. The other thing that I did is put these butt connectors on. Now this butt connector is a heat shrink tube type. I crimped it down with a good pair of crimps right here to put a nice divot in that, not using, you know, some of these come in a multi-tool. Some people try to use vice grips, things like that. Don't do that. It's just going to give you a real bad connection and you're not going to be able to accomplish what you want. You got all this time, money invested in this. So I went ahead, crimped it down. That's solid as can be. When I'm done, I will heat shrink this onto both cables and then start my heat shrink. I'll show you that process here in a little bit. Now, on the 10 gauge 2 connector cable, I did not use, I used a little bit different size on the tubing, the heat shrink. What I used on it was a 1/4 inch because these wires are a little bit thinner insulation, so that'll give me a better connection. And again, once I put the butt connector on, I will just slide these up as far as I can, heat shrink them to give them some good rigidity to where they don't fail. So I'm going to go ahead and crimp this up. I'll show you how everything looks as I heat shrink it up. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and start making up these connectors, finishing them off with heat shrinking them. Again, I'm going to pull those down close to that butt connector as possible. Note that I have still some red showing, again, just to help with the polarity. I'm going to heat these up a little bit, get them shrunk down onto those wires, and then I'm going to start heating up just the ends of the heat shrink on, sorry, it's a weird angle for me to do this without burning these up, the ends on the connector itself. I'm going to do these as well, get those tight onto those wires. That's going to give a super, super strong hold on all the work that I'm doing here and getting that done. Now I'm going to take these, since I put 2 pieces on here, again we're going to slide one out from the other, a little difficult to do, get it started and heat shrinking it a little bit over top. Sorry, weird angle, can't get it. I wish I could, if they ever made a right-handed or a right-angled camera, it would be great. Heat shrink this, you can see how that's just going to go down on the edge there. Again, it's just about, at this point, I'm just adding rigidity to the wire itself. I'm going to start my other one here so I don't screw up. Get these out. Needle nose here somewhere. Got all my tools thrown around here. It's great watching me be an idiot on a video, but you guys get the point of what I'm doing here. I get that one out. Get it over the yellow just a little bit, again, to give it some retention, some rigidity. And melt that on there. Not burn my fingers too bad in the process since I'm trying to do this on video. Now that that's started, what I can do is now slide these up over out of the way for the time being. I'm going to protect them with my hand while I heat shrink those two pieces down. And get it. I'm going to have to hold here so I don't burn myself once I start, and you all can see what I'm doing here. Angle your heat down the right way. If not, you're going to melt the one heat shrink tube that's in your hand, and you won't be able to push it down where you want to push it. If you get an air bubble in your heat shrink, not a problem. Ouch, that burns. Got no hair left on that arm. Just take a little pin, poke a hole in it, get that out. Now, what I'm going to do here is where that's exposed, I'm just going to come across each one of those about the same length. And now I'm going to heat shrink those. That's going to go across that tube and wrap, or that butt connector, really wrap that up as a tight connection. You see how it just forms right onto that. It's going to give super strength to those cables. And then I'll get into zip tying them together, show you that, and then I'll put a finish heat shrink back over top of it. So that way I don't gouge anything with my cable ties and all of that. And I'll show that here in just a little bit. So that's all heat shrinked up. You can see what I did here. This wire's heat shrinked, got a little bit of red showing there. Everything looks good, and I'm going to go ahead and I'll zip tie it up. We'll go show you that here next. Alright, so here's my zip ties. If anybody's watching in my videos, you know I am a stickler on how the zip ties get oriented the same direction. They get cut off flush without leaving gouged edges that's going to cut the shit out of your hand later. Now, I put the zip ties in the center of the barrel connectors themselves, and then just to the outside of the barrel connectors to support these cables. That gives a solid connection, so no matter how much my bike vibrates, it's not going to cause me any issue. I'm going to take a 1 inch or 3/4 inch piece of heat tube here. We're just going to gauge it kind of in the center. We're going to heat shrink that around. That's going to give us a nice finished effect to where we cover up all of those zip ties and just helps protect the connection a little better. Twist it here, turn it. See how it just kind of goes in between there and really takes form of the cable and everything underneath it. And it's going to just, again, really strengthen up that connection that I made, because I did, I interrupted the flow of the electrons in the cable. So that's it. That is a finished connector. That's how we make them up. And it's going to be solid once it cools off. And you'll be able to see, how effective and cool that idea is, because now I can jumpstart a bike that does not have one of these, or they don't have a port or anything like that. I can do the traditional clamps and still utilize these cables that I bought. Now, this is the finished product and what I was trying to get to. Again, we started with this cable set from Advanced Auto. I'm sure it's available in other places. It's a 10 gauge, 10 foot, cables. Comes in 10 gauge wire, has the nice smaller connectors on it that you can get into a lawnmower, or in this case, a motorcycle battery, versus the traditional jumper cables. It's going to have something real big for your car batteries. This is going to be real small so you can get into there. What I wanted to do was, I had a lot of problems with my bike starting this year. I went through some regulator issues and I got that fixed. But what I wanted to do was keep a traditional pair of jumper cables that I could put in the box or in the bag and keep it, to where I can use them for other bikes that don't have a charging port. Now, with that, since I'm going to replace my charging port on my motorcycle, it came with a battery tender version. This is a 10 gauge wire that I'm going to make up, and I'll show that here a little bit later. But that's what's going to go on my bike. So now it being 10 gauge to 10 gauge, I can actually jump start my bike from someone else's motorcycle and or car, because these clamps do get big enough you can still go in a car, and your amp draw on a bike is less than a car. It's a lot, but less. I have confirmed that these ends will still fit a normal battery tender plug-in, so I will be able to maintain my lithium battery in my Harley Davidson and my lead acid AGM battery in my Kawasaki. So those will get put onto the bike. And the reason I did that is, for me, since both of my bikes are going to have these upgraded battery ports on them, charging ports, I'll be able to go to the bike, and basically, since most of the time my Kawasaki never leaves unless the Harley leaves, is I'll be able to just plug this in to a charging port on bike A, plug it into bike B, and now I have a direct set of jumper cables that are going from bike to bike without ever having to take my seat off, the computer out, all the wiring, everything like that. My bike's an ultra limited, and I don't run the tour pack, I don't run the CB anymore, things like that. And I got a ton of cables that are just coiled up underneath the wheel, under the seat. So by having to jump start that thing so many times this year, I'm afraid eventually I'm just going to cook the goose and break a cable underneath there and run some grief having to track that down. Moving the computer is not a good idea because all the harnesses underneath there. So that will allow me a direct connect between bikes, and they'll fit on pretty tight, things like that. And then that will allow me to where I don't have to remove anything on my Harley Davidson to jump start it, and or the Kawasaki at this point. Now, the only downfall to this setup, and I have to do it for polarity reasons, is this basically becomes a jumper cable to extend from bike to bike. Is now you can see the red becomes the exposed wire. So you have to be careful with that you don't let it touch the bike. But, come on, you're going to be holding this, you're going to be holding the port, you're going to be plugging it in, and when that's secure, then you're going to go to the dead bike, plug it in, or the live bike, the battery you're jumping from, plug it in. So the ability to really cross that to ground, slim to none, but I had to have this ground be the exposed connector on this, just like a battery tender is, because that way if it does ground out on the bike, since it's such a short cable, I'm not going to cause myself any grief. So that is the only drawback to this method, but as you can see, this is going to be a really nice set of jumper cables that can go on the bike, compact, to give me everything that I need, and still maintain the flexibility to putting these ends back on it for different bikes and different applications. Alright, so I'm making the quick connect end up on the bike. To do that, I did things a little bit differently on this. Is I have to extend the cable, that's just not long enough, hence why I've had the butt connectors in there. I went ahead and took a piece of heat shrink almost the length of the red wire down, because I wanted to hide as much red. I just don't want a nasty red wire hanging down. And I just left the tip red there. You could do a little less if you wanted. My whole point is I do that because when I hook things up, I can see that logically in my mind, red to red, black to black. If I cover this all the way with black, I wouldn't be able to see that. It just gives you a peace of mind. It gives me a peace of mind. You can do it all black if you want. Totally get it. People don't want strange colors on their bike, things like that. Now, in order to do this, this wire for me is a little thinner, so I used a 1/4 inch piece of heat shrink, and I went ahead and heat shrink those before I crimped them down. So the heat shrink is actually up under the ends of these butt connector sleeves. So when I go to solder that, that's going to give a super, super tight connection on that for this, because this is what's going to remain on the bike. And it's going to get rattled a lot, it's going to get movement, things like that, and I don't want it to go bad. Now on this cable here, this is the extension cable I'm going to use, and then I'll put eyelets on the other side. They get attached to the battery. Again, I haven't decided if I'm going to put a fuse in this or not. Light me up in comments whether it's good or bad. I don't really care, because there's things on that bike that just, it's a solid cable going back and forth. Sorry, it is. And you're using jumper cables, there's no fuse in it. But I went ahead and heat shrunk this up before, again, I put it in the butt connector, because now this heat shrink's going to be underneath that sleeve of the butt connector, give a real tight connection. So I'll go ahead and get this done. Here's an example of the butt connector I just did. As you can see, the heat shrink on each side of the cable, just to give it rigidity, is underneath the sleeves, and I went ahead and heated these up. So now once this dries, it's going to be a solid hard piece of plastic that's really holding that cable down. Now I'm going to take another, I believe, 1/4 inch or 10 millimeter, I'll have to see which one fits. I'll put that over top of this butt connector, and again, that will just seal everything. Again, it'll be triple layered by the time it's said and done. I probably won't put the zip ties on this because I want a cleaner look when it comes for the bike. So I'm going to clean that up a little bit. Matter of fact, I may end up putting these cables together and heat shrinking them all the way down, so that way it's not sitting on the bike with two cables that are spread open like that, like a girl that's in a trailer park. So we'll get to that next. We'll see what the finished product looks like. Alright, so here's the charging port that came with the battery tender. Now, I had a short in my air ride suspension. You can see what that son of a gun did to that connector. So, still worked. I just left it in. It just got hot, melted the plastic a little bit. Now, to further prove my point that this will connect to a battery tender port, plugs in just like that. Nice solid connection. So, goes to prove I can do what I want to do, what I'm accomplishing to do here. Now, I'm going to make this the same size as the existing port was. Just come down, basically cut it off to about right there. So that's going to extend the cable just a little bit. Find my cable cutters. And then we'll get to putting the eyelets on it and heat shrinking those up so that way we can fit this onto the bike. And we'll have a nice 10 gauge jumper battery charger port, and it'll all work out here. Now, again, you can put a fuse on this if you want. I've got the ability to do so. I can't say that I won't, because I'm just a fan of things being fused. But if I do it, it will be such a fuse that I can at least get this bike to start or crank over without blowing the fuse on it. But I don't know. We'll see. I've got a smart battery on this bike. If it senses a short, it's going to shut down, and it won't ruin the bike, won't catch fire or anything like that. So I can get away with this. Whereas if you have a normal AGM battery, you're going to kind of be screwed here. So I'm getting my eyelets on. The particular eyelet here, the red one, I went ahead and used red heat shrink. I don't have a lot of it because things black on black look good. But I left that in red heat shrink because I didn't want to make no mistake about it which side of the battery this thing goes on. So word of caution, you may want to do that. Now, these eyelets here, they look a little small, but the reason I went with them is because this hole fits the screw. The eyelets they give you on these things are, what the hell are they using that for? Effing car? I mean, they move around. You get half of a crimp on it. You don't really, unless you put a washer on there, these just move back and forth. So I don't know what battery tender's doing with that, but maybe they think you're going to tie this on a car battery, which you can. Don't get me wrong, you can. But these eyelets are gold plated. The other thing about them, as you go to put these eyelets on, you physically have to screw this eyelet down because it's threaded on the inside. So that helps give a really super tight grip. And then as you can see, I went ahead and put a crimp in there with a nice dimple. I'm going to push this heat shrink all the way up. I'll heat shrink it, and then that will be my connector that goes onto the bike. I'm not going to show a finished product, how to put this on the bike. If you know how to do this on a battery tender, you're going to know how to do this. But the important thing is, you see how it's made up, the finished product. I'll go back through and review the entire jumper cable setup that I created here. Alright, so we'll give a quick rundown of everything that I created here. Here is the bike harness that's going to go on the bike. You can see that the red, the black is distinct. I did not tie these together because your batteries spread apart on the terminals. You're going to spread that apart. It is solid black going all the way down with just the tip being red. So from peace of mind, I know that I'm not reversing polarity by mistake in any way. That will go onto the bike. It is nicely heat shrunk together. Some people may ask why I don't use the new solder butt connectors. The problem is, my fear is you could get a cold soldering joint. When you solder, you actually have to heat the wire, and then I always explain it, paint the solder onto the wire. Once the wire is hot enough, it will melt the solder. The solder will just all of a sudden turn bright and just kind of soak into it. And then you just kind of paint it across. You don't get a glob on your iron and then touch it to the wire and hope that's going to work. So my thought, and I haven't used those new solder connectors, and maybe somebody can give me an idea what they work, is it heats the outside of the heat shrink, it heats that little band of solder in there, but I don't know how you really get the wires heated up enough to where you don't get a cold solder joint. So that's why I chose to do butt connectors that are crimp-on style here. I'm not a fan of crimp-on connectors at all. I'm a huge fan on everything being soldered, but unfortunately this is just too thick a gauge wire. My soldering iron's not going to be able to handle it without the risk of getting a cold solder joint. So that's the connector that's going to go on the bike. Again, you know, I can come up with my battery tender and I can just plug this bad boy in and maintain the bike in the winter when I'm not riding it, things like that. Unplug it. I did not put a fuse link in here. I have a smart battery that will protect me against that and thermally shut down, so I don't have to worry about that, whereas others with a traditional AGM might or should. So that's the bike connector. Here's my jumper cables. Again, this bike connector is connected up to the bike, waiting. I need to be jump started. I don't have to take the seat off. I don't have to remove the computer. I don't have to do shit. All I got to do is plug this wire, this jumper cable that I created, into there like that. Now that connects the bike. It's ready to rock and roll. Now I'm waiting to connect to the other side. Old person pulls up, says, hey, got a car you can use? Not a problem. I can go and say, hey, give me a second. I can put these ends on. Kind of hard to do on the camera. That's all of our YouTube's excuse. Now I can connect this to a traditional battery of a car or anything like that and jump my bike directly, again, without having to take the seat off. Now, in the case that where I'm going to create this for my girlfriend's bike and I put the other connector on, again, I can just put this other end on and basically tie the bikes together directly with that connector without having to take her battery cover off or anything like that. So that's why I did that. This will all wrap up minus the harness, the charging port that goes onto the bike. It'll all wrap back up into this nice little packet or cover here to keep the bike or the jumper cables stowed away. So that's the jumper cables I created. I recommend everybody else, if you've got a better idea on how to do this, please let me know. This is my idea, my attempt, something I came up with. I would love to see a manufacturer create this because I think it makes all the sense in the world. Doesn't mean somebody won't steal my idea, but hey, it's YouTube. I'm not here to make millions. I'm just here to help people get down the road and stay on the road. So good luck. Any questions, hit me up in the comments. Like, subscribe if you like what I do. If you don't like what I do, still like and subscribe, but let me know. Thanks. All right, so there is the charging port on the bike itself, zip tied up. Put that cover back on. You want to zip tie it up. You don't want your charging port dangling down onto the engine, getting hot, melting, anything like that. Plus, it just secures it in place. I will eventually source a cover that goes on there, even if all I have to do is just take an old port that I'm not using and plug it into that just to seal it up and cap off the wires. I'll do that. So that's what it is. As you can see, I've got a ton of freaking cables back there because this is an ultra limited. It's supposed to have the trunk pack on it. I can still put the trunk pack on, but in the summer I typically don't run it. So that's what I'm trying to get away from, is having to do that every time I need a jump on my bike. So we're gonna get that wired in. We'll be done. Hope this video helped. If anybody has any questions at all, again, feel free, hit me up, ask me questions. If it's 2 years after I made the video, I may not remember. But if you got any recommendations, suggestions, or anything that can improve this, let people know so that way we can all be a community to help each other out. Stay safe, happy riding, and hope this video helped people out.